Rain poured down outside St. Mary's Hospital, its lights glowing through the storm. Meera Sharma, exhausted after a double shift at the diner, spotted an elderly man collapsing on the sidewalk. Without a second thought, she ran to him, shouting for help. Doctors rushed out as she stayed by his side, holding his trembling hand. When they needed a rare blood type, she volunteered instantly. Hours later, the old man opened his eyes, whispering a blessing to the stranger who saved him, never knowing she had just changed the life of his grandson. Aarav Malhotra, the cold and untouchable CEO. The next morning, Aarav Malhotra stood in the marble lobby of Malhotra Enterprises, his reflection sharp and cold against the glass doors. He was a man everyone respected and feared. His words could build or destroy careers. But that morning, even his signature composure had cracks. His grandfather, Mr. Malhotra Sr., still lay in a hospital bed, recovering steadily, thanks to one woman, a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere in the middle of a thunderstorm, saving his life. Aarav couldn't shake the thought of her. She didn't even leave her name. He asked his personal assistant, Daniel, who followed 2 steps behind him. Daniel flipped through a file nervously. "No, sir. The hospital staff said she left right after donating blood. No ID, no number, just disappeared." Aarav stopped walking. "Find her." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, there are thousands of patients and visitors every day," I said. "Find her." Aarav's tone left no room for argument. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something else. Something unfamiliar. A restlessness that burned in his chest. He didn't know her, yet he couldn't forget her face, pale under the hospital lights. Soaked hair clinging to her cheeks. Eyes filled with quiet courage. Days turned into weeks. Aarav's office turned into a search command center. He assigned 3 departments to track her down, PR, HR, and security, as if she were a missing corporate asset. They checked hospital surveillance, blood donor lists, social media mentions. Nothing. It was as if the woman had vanished into thin air. Even his grandfather didn't remember much. "She was wearing a gray hoodie," the old man said weakly, "and she smiled when she held my hand. Like an angel." An angel. Aarav almost smiled at the thought, but his phone buzzed, dragging him back into his usual world. Deadlines, meetings, mergers. Yet, every night when he came home, he'd find himself staring at the rain outside his penthouse windows, remembering that night. Somewhere out there was the woman who had saved his grandfather and changed something in him he couldn't explain. 3 weeks later, Monday morning, the cafeteria at Malhotra Enterprises buzzed with chatter, employees in suits grabbing coffee, interns whispering about deadlines, the hum of espresso machines filling the air, and behind the counter, tying her apron nervously, stood Meera Sharma. After losing her last job at the diner, she'd signed up with a temp agency that placed workers wherever they were needed, offices, events, cafeterias. She didn't know or care whose company this was. She just needed to make rent and keep her siblings in school. "Hey new girl," the supervisor called. "VIP floor gets coffee service at 9. Don't mess up, okay? The CEO's office is on that route." Meera nodded quickly. "Got it?" Her hands shook slightly as she carried the tray, 6 black coffees and 2 teas. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, the energy changed instantly. The executive floor was quieter, colder. Every click of her shoes echoed through the hall. She set the tray on the conference table just as the meeting ended. And then she froze. Standing by the window was Aarav Malhotra himself. Tall, composed, and impossibly intimidating. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. For a moment, Meera forgot how to breathe. But it wasn't fear, it was recognition. The same man who'd rushed into the ER that night, shouting for his grandfather. She had seen him, briefly, before slipping away. He didn't look her way. Not yet. He was flipping through a report, eyes cold, expression unreadable. She lowered her head, placed the last cup on the table, and turned to leave. "Wait," a voice said, dip controlled. Her hand froze on the tray handle. When she turned around, he was watching her, not the way a boss watches staff, but with something far heavier. His gaze softened for a heartbeat before he masked it. "Your name?" he asked. "Meera Sharma, sir." He said nothing for a moment, just studied her face, as if trying to confirm what his heart already knew. Then he nodded slightly. "You've worked here long. Today's my first day." He looked down, smiled faintly, so faintly that even Daniel, standing nearby, almost missed it. "Welcome," Aarav said simply, his voice lower than usual. "Carry on." She nodded quickly and left, clutching the tray like a shield. As soon as the door closed, Daniel frowned. "Sir, Is something wrong? Araf's eyes stayed on the door. No, he said quietly. Everything's finally right. That evening, he couldn't focus on work. Her face kept appearing in his mind, those same eyes. That same calm kindness he'd seen at the hospital. He opened the security feed on his phone. One of the cafeteria cameras. There she was, wiping down tables after hours, humming softly to herself. For the first time in years, the mighty CEO didn't see numbers, deals, or deadlines. He saw humanity, and he couldn't look away. The next morning, the cafeteria manager nearly dropped his clipboard. Sir, Mr. You here? Aarav stood awkwardly at the counter, in his tailored navy suit, holding 2 cups of coffee. 2 sugars, right? He asked Meera, recalling what he'd overheard the day before. Meera blinked, unsure if it was real. Yes sir. He smiled genuinely this time. Then have one with me. The entire cafeteria went silent. No one had ever seen the CEO come down for coffee. Ever. He sat across from her, at a small corner table as dozens of employees watched in disbelief. Meera shifted uncomfortably. Sir, people are staring. Let them, Aarav said softly. They've never seen me with someone worth looking at. She flushed, unsure whether to laugh or escape. But his tone wasn't flirtatious, it was sincere. Grateful. Do you know my grandfather? He asked suddenly. Her breath caught. He said a young woman saved his life 3 weeks ago, donated blood, stayed by his side. He looked straight into her eyes. That was you, wasn't it? Meera hesitated, then nodded. Anyone would have helped. No, he said firmly. Not everyone would have done what you did. Not in that storm. Not without expecting anything in return. She looked down. I didn't do it for a reward. I know. His voice softened. That's why I can't stop thinking about it. From that day, everything changed. The man known for firing employees over a single mistake now lingered in the cafeteria, sometimes just watching quietly as Meera worked. He'd ask her about her siblings, her favorite food, her dreams. At first she thought he was just being kind out of gratitude, but soon, the way he looked at her made her heart skip. There was admiration in his eyes, and something deeper. Still, she kept her distance. Men like him didn't fall for girls like her, or so she thought. One afternoon, during a board meeting, Aarav snapped at an executive for interrupting. Daniel leaned over and whispered, Sir, you've been distracted lately. Aarav smirked. You ever meet someone who makes you forget you're supposed to be in charge? Daniel stared blankly. Sir, that's not a common problem. Aarav chuckled softly. It is now. Later that week, he arranged for Meera's shift to include the top floor, the executive lounge. When she entered, he was already there, waiting with 2 cups of coffee again. You don't have to keep thanking me, sir, she said nervously. He smiled. I'm not thanking you. I'm learning from you. Learning, he nodded. I run a company that feeds thousands of families, but I didn't know what selflessness looked like until I met you. Her eyes softened. You're exaggerating. He took a step closer. Maybe, but if that's what it takes to keep you in my life, I don't mind. Meera's cheeks flushed. She grabbed her tray and backed toward the door. You shouldn't say things like that, Mr. Malhotra. Then stop making me feel them, he said quietly. She froze, then left without another word. That night, Aarav's grandfather called from the hospital. She came by today, the old man said happily. You're Meera? She brought flowers. Told me to get better soon. Aarav smiled into the phone. She's something, isn't she? She's special, his grandfather said. Don't lose her, son. Aarav's chest tightened. I don't plan to. The next morning, Meera arrived at work to find a small envelope on the cafeteria counter. Inside was a handwritten note. Coffee's on me today. She smiled, despite herself. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a story that would rewrite both of their lives. The next few weeks at Malhotra Enterprises felt different, at least for Meera Sharma. Ever since the note on the counter, the CEO himself had become a quiet presence in her daily routine. He never overstepped. He never demanded anything. But he was there every morning, like clockwork, walking into the cafeteria as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a billionaire executive to wait in line for coffee. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but coincidences didn't happen 3 days in a row, or 5, or 10. Sometimes, he'd just nod at her. Other times, he'd ask simple questions about her day, her shifts, her siblings' school. Nothing personal, yet somehow deeply personal, and that terrified her. She didn't want pity. She didn't want attention that made her a topic in break room whispers. She wanted to work, earn her paycheck, and go home. But the CEO of one of the biggest companies in New York City seemed determined to make that impossible. One morning, as she restocked napkins, Olivia, a senior marketing assistant, smirked at her from a nearby table. "So, Meera," Olivia said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "how does it feel having the CEO bring you coffee now? Pretty impressive for a cafeteria girl, huh?" A few coworkers chuckled. Meera froze, mid-motion, cheeks burning. She forced a smile. "He was just being polite, right?" Olivia sneered. "Polite enough to ignore a room full of executives for you. Maybe you're better at networking than we thought." Before Meera could respond, a calm, deep voice cut through the tension. "Olivia," Aarav said, stepping into the cafeteria. The room went silent instantly. Every employee straightened, eyes darting between the two. Aarav's expression was unreadable, but his tone was cold as steel. "Is that how you talk to your coworkers here?" Olivia's face drained of color. "Sir, I didn't mean." "Then next time, don't," he said sharply. "Because kindness isn't a competition, and respect isn't earned by mocking someone's job." He turned to Meera, his voice softening. "You okay?" She nodded quickly, unable to meet his gaze. "Yes, sir." He gave a slight nod. "Good." Then, to everyone's shock, he rolled up his sleeves, picked up a mop, and started cleaning the coffee spill near Meera's counter. Nobody moved. The CEO, the same man who once fired an executive for being late to a meeting, was mopping the cafeteria floor. Daniel, watching from the doorway, nearly dropped his tablet. Aarav finished, handed the mop back to Meera, and said quietly, "You're not invisible here, remember that." Then he walked out, leaving behind stunned silence and a room full of employees who suddenly redefined what power looked like. That afternoon, rumors exploded across every department. "Did you hear? The CEO defended the cafeteria girl. He actually mopped the floor. Is he in love with her?" By evening, Meera couldn't escape the whispers. Her phone buzzed with anonymous messages. Some were kind, others were cruel. She sat in the locker room after her shift, head buried in her hands. She'd only wanted peace, not this storm of gossip. Just then, the door creaked open. Aarav stood there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I couldn't let you think I regret defending you." She looked up, weary. "Now everyone thinks there's something between us." He smiled faintly. "Maybe because they're used to seeing me act like I don't have a heart." "That's not funny." "Mr. Malhotra, no," he said softly, sitting across from her. "It's not." They sat in silence for a moment. The air between them was heavy but warm. Finally, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" He looked down at his cup, then back at her. "Because you remind me of what matters. I spend my life surrounded by people who smile when I walk by, but you smile when no one's looking." Her breath caught. He leaned forward slightly. "You saved my grandfather's life, Meera, but I think you might have saved mine too, from becoming someone I never wanted to be." Her eyes softened, but she still shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "I'm not doing this because I owe you," he said. "I'm doing it because I want to know you." The next few days were gentler. Aarav made no grand gestures, just small acts of thoughtfulness. He sent extra lunch portions to the cafeteria by accident. He passed her notes, reminding her to take breaks. He'd linger in hallways, pretending to check his phone, just to catch a glimpse of her smile. And slowly, Meera's fear turned into warmth. She found herself laughing more, smiling when he entered the room, feeling a strange comfort in his presence, the kind that didn't make sense for 2 people from such different worlds. 2 weeks later, Aarav's grandfather, Mr. Malhotra Sr., was discharged from the hospital. "Bring the girl who saved me," he told Aarav over breakfast. "I want to thank her properly. She works for us now," Aarav said with a small smile. "In the cafeteria." His grandfather chuckled. "Then invite her to lunch. Not as staff, as family." The next day, Meera received a formal invitation, with the Malhotra family crest embossed in gold. Heart nearly stopped. When she arrived at the mansion, a sprawling estate overlooking the Hudson River, she almost turned back at the gate, but the guard smiled warmly and said, "Mr. Malhotra's been waiting for you." Inside, the atmosphere was elegant but welcoming. The old man sat near the fireplace, his face lighting up as soon as he saw her. "You," he exclaimed, struggling to rise. Aarav rushed to help him, but the elder waved him off and took Meera's hands in his. "My angel," Meera smiled shyly. "I'm so glad you're better, sir." He patted her hands affectionately. "Because of you, child, because of your courage." She blushed, glancing at Aarav, who was watching her quietly, pride and tenderness mingling in his gaze. You know, the old man continued, this grandson of mine hasn't smiled like this in years. I think you've done more healing in this family than any doctor could. Grandpa, Aarav said gently, half amused, but Mr. Malhotra winked. Don't grandpa me, you think I don't see how you look at her. Meera's cheeks turned crimson. Aarav coughed, trying to change the subject. Would you like some tea? She nodded gratefully. That would be nice. As he poured her cup, their fingers brushed briefly. A small jolt of electricity passed between them, soft, silent, undeniable. That evening, after Meera left, Aarav's grandfather leaned back in his chair. She's special, he said quietly. I know, Aarav replied. Then don't waste time, the old man advised. People like her don't cross your path twice. Aarav smiled faintly. She's not ready for my world. Then make your world ready for hers. Over the next few days, the connection between them deepened quietly, naturally. They didn't need words, just small gestures, a shared laugh, a warm glance, a coffee placed on her counter before she arrived. Every moment built a bridge between two people who had no logical reason to meet yet, every reason to stay. Meera began to realize that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a charity case. Maybe she was someone the CEO, the untouchable Aarav Malhotra, truly saw. And Aarav knew one thing with absolute certainty. He'd met countless, powerful, beautiful, ambitious women, but none of them had ever made his heart race like the girl who once stood in the rain, saving a stranger with nothing but courage and compassion. It started with a quiet morning, the kind that feels to calm before a storm. Meera was wiping the counter in the company cafeteria when she noticed a reflection behind her. Tall, steady, familiar Aarav Malhotra. He wasn't supposed to be there that early, yet there he was, standing in silence, watching her like a man trying to memorize every detail. Good morning, Mr. Malhotra, she said politely, keeping her tone professional. Morning, he replied, but his voice held something deeper. When she turned back, he was still standing there. She sighed softly. Is there something you need? Yes, he said after a pause. You. She froze. Her hands tightened around the rag. Excuse me. He took a few slow steps forward, his expression open, vulnerable, something no one had ever seen from him. Meera, I've tried to stay away, he admitted, told myself it was gratitude, admiration, anything but what it really is. But the truth is, I'm in love with you. Her breath hitched. I don't care about the differences between us, where you come from, what job you do, what people will say, he exhaled. I care about you. The cafeteria was empty except for the hum of the coffee machine and the sound of her heartbeat when she finally found her voice. It was trembling. Don't say things like that, sir. He frowned. Why not? Because, she began, blinking rapidly. You don't understand. You live in a world of power, luxury, and influence. People like me, people like you, he interrupted softly, are the reason people like me still have a heart. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. We come from different worlds. People like me don't belong in your world. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then I'll build a world where you do. Her lips parted, but no words came out. He smiled faintly, his gaze gentle. You once said you didn't do things for rewards. Let me prove that my love isn't one either. Without another word, he walked away, leaving her trembling, her heart torn between fear and something she didn't want to name. That night, Meera couldn't sleep. His words echoed through her mind. Then I'll build a world where you do. She wanted to believe him, God. She wanted to, but she'd seen enough of life to know love alone didn't erase differences in class, in pride, in expectations. Her siblings' laughter in the next room brought her back to reality. She had responsibilities, bills, school fees, groceries. Fairy tales didn't happen for girls like her. The next morning, a black car pulled up in front of their modest apartment building in Queens. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering. Out stepped Aarav Malhotra, dressed in a crisp white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up. He looked strangely at ease, completely out of place in that narrow street, yet perfectly at home in himself. Meera, still in her worn sweater, opened the door and nearly fainted. Mr. Malhotra, she whispered, mortified. What are you doing here? He smiled. I told you I'd build a world where you belong. I thought I'd start here. Before she could stop him, he stepped inside. Her small apartment smelled of tea and detergent. The furniture was old, but clean. The walls were decorated with their siblings' school drawings. A teenage boy, Eamon, emerged from the kitchen. Meera, there's a billionaire in our living room. Be polite, she hissed, glaring. Aarav chuckled softly. Hi, Eamon. I'm Aarav. The boy blinked, like, the Aarav from the news. Unfortunately, yes, Aarav said with a grin. Then a little girl peeked from behind a curtain, clutching a stuffed bunny. Are you the man who sent my sister flowers? Meera turned crimson. Tara, Aarav smiled warmly. Maybe, Tara giggled. She kept them in a vase for days. Tara. The girl ran off laughing. Aarav's smile lingered. Then he looked back at Meera, the embarrassment, the warmth, the love in her eyes all tangled into one expression. This is your world, he said softly, and it's beautiful. She crossed her arms defensively. You shouldn't be here. People will talk. They already do, he said simply, so let's give them something worth talking about. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned toward her siblings. I came here to tell your family something, he said, something important. Eamon raised an eyebrow. You're not firing her, right? Aarav smiled faintly. No. I'm asking to marry her. The room went silent. Meera's jaw dropped. Aarav. He looked at her steadily. You said we come from different worlds. Then let's meet halfway. Her hands trembled. You can't just. I can. He interrupted softly, because I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Her siblings looked from her to him in stunned silence. Meera, he said, stepping closer, his voice low and steady. You saved my grandfather. You changed the way I see people. You made me want to be better. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. She was speechless. Her heart screamed yes. Her mind whispered no. Tara tugged on her sleeve. Say yes, Meera. He looks like he means it. Even Aman, always the skeptic, smirked. Guess he's serious, huh? Aarav knelt slightly, meeting Meera's eyes. Please, don't say no because you're afraid of what people will think. Say no only if you truly don't want me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Then let me talk to someone who might help, he said gently. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. A few moments later, a warm, familiar voice filled the room. Grandpa, put her on, said Mr. Malhotra Sr., his tone teasing. Aarav handed Meera the phone. Child, the old man said affectionately, are you really making my grandson chase you through the city like a love-struck fool? Meera laughed through her tears. Sir, I never meant, I know, he interrupted kindly. But listen, Beta, love doesn't care about walls or worlds. It only asks for truth. And from what I've seen, you're the truest person he'll ever find. A tear rolled down her cheek. I'm scared, said. Good, he said, because love that's worth anything always begins with a little fear. A week later, they were married. No cameras, no headlines, no designer gowns or diamond-covered invitations. Just a quiet garden behind the Malhotra family home. Her simple white dress fluttered in the evening breeze. Aarav stood opposite her in a plain suit. His expression calm but his eyes shining with emotion. His grandfather blessed them with trembling hands, whispering, You've both saved each other. Never forget that. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Aarav reached for her hand. His voice barely above a whisper. I told you, he said, smiling through tears. I'd build a world where you belong. Meera looked up at him, the man she once thought belonged to a universe far beyond hers, and smiled softly. You didn't have to build it. She whispered back. You just had to open the door. He kissed her forehead, holding her close as the sun dipped behind them. No cameras, no applause. Just the sound of wind, laughter, and two hearts, finally at peace. That night, as they stood together under the stars, Meera rested her head on his shoulder. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Never, he said without hesitation. I've built empires, Meera, but this this is the first thing I've ever built that feels real. She smiled. You know people will still talk. He chuckled. Let them, maybe they'll learn something about love. The mansion looked like something out of a dream, towering white pillars, marble floors, chandeliers that glimmered like frozen stars. But to Meera it didn't feel like home. Not yet. Every step she took echoed too loudly. Every servant's bow felt too stiff. And every polite smile carried a whisper behind it. She had gone from a small apartment in Queens to the most luxurious home in the city, and she didn't know where she'll fit in anymore. The first few days after the wedding were a blur of introductions, stares, and whispered gossip. She's the girl from the cafeteria. Imagine the billionaire's wife was a waitress. Maybe it's Charity. Maybe he'll get bored. The voices came from behind half-open doors, from corners of hallways. from people who smiled too sweetly to her face. Meera tried to ignore them. She kept her head down, her smile polite, but when she was alone, she felt the sting of every word. Aarav noticed, he always did. At breakfast one morning, he found her sitting by the window, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "Hey," he said softly, taking the seat beside her. "You haven't touched your food." "I'm not that hungry," she murmured. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You used to eat 2 bagels in the cafeteria every morning. You can't fool me." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "That was before people started judging what I eat, what I wear, how I walk, how I breathe." He reached out and took her hand. "Let them judge. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being yourself." She hesitated, her voice small. "I don't belong here, Aarav. Everything about this world feels wrong for me." He shook his head gently. "You belong wherever you stand with confidence. And if that's hard right now, I'll stand beside you until you find it." But confidence didn't come easily. At charity galas, women in diamond gowns smiled with perfect teeth and whispered behind champagne glasses. "Sweet story," one of them said once, her tone dripping with envy. "Like a fairy tale, only most fairy tales end when the girl wakes up." Meera froze. Aarav, standing nearby, caught the tone instantly. He turned toward the woman, his expression polite but cutting. "You're right," he said calmly. "Most fairy tales do end when people wake up. That's why I don't live in one. I live in the real world with the real woman who saved my family's life." The woman blanched. Others looked away. Aarav slipped his arm around Meera's waist and whispered, "You don't have to fight them. I'll do it for both of us." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Meera began to find her rhythm. She started spending time with Mr. Malhotra Sr., her grandfather-in-law, in the sunny garden behind the mansion. He adored her, always ready with stories, laughter, and wisdom. One afternoon, as they shared tea beneath the old oak tree, he said, "My dear, this house was built with money, but you're the first one to fill it with grace." Meera smiled softly. "I'm just trying to adjust." He chuckled. Adjustment is just another word for courage. Still, not everyone saw her that way. Aarav's business rivals had begun to whisper to articles popped up online. CEO marries commoner, love story, or PR move. Aarav Malhotra, Fairytale, marriage shocks, investors. One particularly ruthless competitor, Corin Oberoi, made a snide remark during a conference dinner. "Bold move, Aarav," he said loudly, smirking. "You turned a waitress into a wife. What's next? Hiring baristas for board meetings." Laughter rippled through the room until Aarav stood up. His voice was calm but sharp as glass. "Careful, Corin. The same waitress you mock has more courage and compassion than half the people in this room. She saved my grandfather's life. What have you done that's even half as meaningful?" The room went silent. Corin shifted uncomfortably, muttering something under his breath. Aarav's tone softened as he added, "I married her because she reminds me what matters. And if that bothers anyone, good. Maybe it's time it did." That night, back home, Meera said quietly, "You didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes," he said. "I did." She shook her head. "It'll make things worse for you." He smiled faintly. "Let them talk. If being mocked for loving you is the price I pay, I'll pay it gladly." Her eyes welled up. "Why do you care so much?" He looked at her like she was the only person in the world. "Because you remind me of who I used to be, before power made me forget." She didn't say anything, just leaned into him, letting the quiet fill the space between them to help her adjust. Aarav began teaching her about his world, not to change her, but to make her comfortable in it. He bought her books on business, finance, and leadership. He'd sit with her after dinner, explaining how the company worked, how decisions were made, what he believed in. But Meera didn't want to just learn, she wanted to help. One day, she asked, "Can I visit the employee training center?" He raised an eyebrow. "You want to?" "Yes," she said. "I used to work with people like them. I want to know how they're treated and what they need." Aarav smiled. "That's why you're my best decision." At the training center, employees were shocked to see the CEO's wife walking among them, shaking hands, asking questions, listening to their stories. "She's nothing like the others." One whispered. "She actually cares," said another. By the end of the day, Meera had a list of ideas: better health programs, scholarship funds for employees, children, and counseling services for families in need. When Aarav read her notes, his eyes softened. "You're not just fitting in, Meera, you're changing things." One evening, Meera passed Aarav's office and heard his voice calm. steady, affectionate. He was on the phone with his best friend. Raghav, you've changed. Man, Raghav said over speaker. You used to care about profits more than people. Aarav chuckled. I still care about both. But Meera, she reminds me that one can't exist without the other. There was a pause. Then Aarav said softly, she saved my grandfather's life, now I'll spend mine saving hers. Meera froze at the doorway, tears gathering in her eyes. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there, overwhelmed, realizing how deeply he meant it. Later that night, when he came to bed, she was still awake. You heard me, didn't you? He said quietly. She turned to him, eyes glistening. I did, he smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Good. Then you know how serious I am. She laughed softly through her tears. You don't have to save me, Aarav. I know, he whispered, pulling her close. But I want to every day. In every way I can. She rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. For the first time since stepping into that mansion, she didn't feel out of place. She didn't feel like a stranger in her own life. For the first time, she felt home. Weeks later, a photo went viral online, not of designer clothes or luxury cars, but of Meera Malhotra sitting cross-legged on the floor of the training center, laughing with janitors and cafeteria staff. The caption read, the CEO's wife remembers where she came from, and that's what makes her extraordinary. Aarav saw it, smiled, and whispered to himself, that's my world now. The morning began like any other quiet sunlight, fresh coffee, the faint hum of the city outside the Malhotra mansion. Meera had just finished setting breakfast for Aarav when she noticed something strange. The house staff, usually calm and polite, were whispering among themselves. Phones were tucked quickly into pockets when she walked by. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Her heart tightened. She'd seen this before, that awkward silence that always came before bad news. When Aarav walked into the dining room, his expression said it all. Don't look online, he said quietly, pulling out a chair. Why? She asked, already reaching for her phone. Meera, but it was too late. The headlines were everywhere. The billionaire and the gold digger. Did Meera Malhotra marry for money? Sources claim CEO's wife manipulated him through his grandfather. Anonymous insider reveals. She knew exactly what she was doing. Meera's hands trembled as she scrolled, reading cruel comments beneath the articles. Typical rags to riches trap. She played the sympathy card. Poor Aarav. She used his family to climb the ladder. Her face went pale. Who would say these things? Aarav clenched his jaw. Sophia. The name struck her like lightning. Sophia Grant, the woman who had once been Aarav's fiancée, a successful socialite from an elite family, beautiful, ambitious, dangerous. It had been years since their breakup, but apparently she hadn't moved on. Sophia had returned from London just a week ago, and the timing of the scandal was no coincidence. Aarav sighed. She's feeding stories to the press. Old photos, twisted details, anything to make you look like the villain. Meera blinked back tears. But why? What did I ever do to her? He looked at her tenderly. You exist. That's enough reason for people like her. By afternoon, the story had exploded. TV anchors debated it on live shows. Paparazzi swarmed the gates of the Malhotra estate. Reporters shouted questions whenever Meera's car pulled out. At one point, a journalist yelled, Mrs. Malhotra, how much did your love cost? The words pierced like knives. Meera's driver accelerated to escape the crowd, but her heart sank deeper with every flash of the cameras. By the time she reached home, she could barely breathe. That night, Aarav found her sitting on the floor of their bedroom, staring at a pile of news clippings. He kneeled beside her. Meera, stop reading that garbage. Tears streamed down her face. They're right, Aarav. I don't belong in your world. Every headline, every whisper, it's because of me. You've worked your whole life to build this reputation, and I'm ruining it. He tried to take her hand, but she pulled away. I love you too much to watch them destroy you, she whispered. Maybe it's better if I just go. He froze. Go where? Anywhere. Back to the life I came from. Somewhere simple. Somewhere quiet. Absolutely not. Aarav, please. He stood, pacing. You think running away will make this stop? You think if you disappear, people will suddenly start believing the truth? She looked up, eyes red. They'll stop attacking you. He stopped, exhaled sharply, and knelt again, this time, cupping her face in his hands. Meera, he said softly, you didn't ruin my reputation. You reminded me what it means to have one worth protecting. Her lips trembled. But the world, if the world can't see your worth, he said firmly, then I'll show them myself. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos. Dozens of reporters had gathered outside Malhotra Enterprises headquarters after an anonymous tip claimed the CEO himself would be making a personal statement. Cameras flashed. Microphones pointed. Aarav stepped out of his black SUV, wearing a charcoal gray suit. Composed, every inch the man the world respected. Meera watched the broadcast from home, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the press hall, the room buzzed with tension. One reporter shouted, "Mr. Malhotra, is it true your wife deceived you into marriage?" Another called out, "Are you filing for divorce?" Aarav raised a hand. The room went silent. His voice was steady but sharp enough to slice through the air. "I've heard enough lies about my wife," he began. "And today, I'm setting the record straight." The reporters exchanged nervous glances. The cameras zoomed in. He continued, "Her name is Meera. She didn't marry me for money. She didn't marry me for fame. She married me because she saw something in me I'd forgotten. Humanity." He paused, scanning the room. "You call her a gold digger. But tell me, which gold digger donates blood to save a stranger's life without even knowing who he is? Which manipulator refuses luxury gifts because she's too humble to accept them?" Flashbulbs went off. The crowd murmured. Aarav's voice softened. "She didn't marry me for money. I married her because she reminded me what love truly is." There was a stunned silence. Then, slowly, the room erupted. Flashes, questions, a rush of noise. But Aarav simply nodded to his assistant and walked off the stage, leaving behind a storm of awe and admiration. When he returned home that night, Meera was waiting by the door. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but this time, they glistened with disbelief. "You did that?" she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Of course I did. You thought I'd let the world write your story for you." She took a shaky step forward. "You didn't have to defend me publicly." He shrugged lightly. "I didn't defend you, Meera. I defended the truth." Tears slipped down her cheeks again, not from pain, but from something deeper. Gratitude, relief, love. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. Aarav stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her. "No," he said softly against her hair. "You deserve more than me. I'm just lucky enough to be the man who realized it first." Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Public opinion began to shift. Talk shows replayed Aarav's speech, calling it the most heartfelt statement from a CEO in decades. Articles that once mocked Meera now praised her courage. From waitress to wife, the real story behind the Malhotra marriage. Love, not status. CEO's bold stand for his wife breaks the internet. Even Sophia's lies started unraveling. An investigative journalist revealed her connection to the scandal, her jealousy, her fake sources. Within a week, she fled the country again, humiliated. Home. Peace slowly returned. One night, Meera found Aarav on the balcony, staring at the skyline. "You never told me you were going to do that press conference," she said softly. He smiled. "If I had, you would have stopped me." "Probably," he chuckled, "and then I would have done it anyway." She laughed through tears. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said, turning toward her, "but I'm yours." They stood there together, no words, no noise, just the quiet hum of the city below and the peace between them above it all. Later, as she drifted to sleep, Meera thought about everything they'd been through. The gossip, the judgment, the pain. And yet, here they were, still standing, still choosing each other. For the first time, she understood something Aarav had once said, that love wasn't about perfection. It was about perseverance. No matter the storm, they would always find their way back home. 2 months had passed since the storm. 2 months of silence, rebuilding, and quiet strength. The headlines had changed, but the whispers lingered. People were beginning to believe the truth about Meera. Yet Aarav knew something more needed to be done. Not for his company, not for publicity, but for her, for the woman who had saved his world. One evening, he walked into their study, where Meera sat reading. She looked peaceful, framed by the glow of the fireplace, wearing a simple cream sweater and jeans, her favorite kind of comfort. He stood quietly for a moment, watching her. Then he said, "I've been planning something." Meera looked up, smiling. "Planning what?" He took a deep breath. "A charity gala." She tilted her head. "For the company?" "No," he said softly. "For you." Her eyes widened. "Aarav, just listen," he interrupted gently. "You've been the center of every rumor, every lie, every cruel whisper. It's time people see the truth. Not through my words, through your actions." She frowned. "I don't need attention, Aarav. I just want peace." He smiled. "Exactly. That's why I'm naming it after you, the Meera Foundation." She froze. You're what? It's a non-profit that will provide medical aid, education, and housing for struggling families, funded by Malhotra Enterprises, but built in your honor, because that's who you are, Meera, the kind of woman who saves lives quietly. Tears filled her eyes. Aarav? That's too much. He knelt beside her chair and took her hand. You once saved my grandfather without asking for anything in return. Let me do this, not for image, not for money, for gratitude. The gala night arrived like a fairy tale, elegant, grand, and glowing with purpose. The ballroom of the Grand Regency Hotel sparkled under golden chandeliers. Journalists lined the red carpet, but this time their questions were softer, their tones respectful. Meera entered on Aarav's arm, wearing a flowing silver gown that shimmered with every step. She looked radiant, but nervous. Aarav leaned close and whispered, "You have nothing to prove tonight, just be yourself. That's enough." She nodded, her heart pounding as the event began. Aarav took the stage, the spotlight washing over him. The room quieted instantly. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and steady. "Tonight isn't about business, or power, or profit. It's about gratitude. Gratitude to one person who reminded me that humanity still exists in a world obsessed with success." He turned toward Meera, smiling. "That person is my wife, Meera Malhotra." Applause erupted, soft at first, then thunderous. Aarav continued. "When my grandfather's life hung by a thread, it wasn't money or connections that saved him. It was a stranger's kindness. That kindness became the foundation of my life, and today, of this trust, the Meera Foundation." The crowd listened in silence. Even the cynical reporters were leaning forward, captivated. Aarav went on, his tone warming. "This foundation will provide medical treatment for the poor, scholarships for underprivileged children, and homes for the homeless. Meera didn't ask for this, but that's exactly why she deserves it." The applause grew louder. Some guests even stood. Meera sat frozen in her chair, tears shining in her eyes. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated at first, but Aarav's reassuring smile gave her courage. She stepped up to the microphone, her voice trembling but clear. "I never imagined standing here," she began. "I was just a girl who wanted to do the right thing, not for recognition, but because it was the only thing that felt right." She looked out over the audience, faces of the rich, powerful, and skeptical, and continued, "People said I didn't belong in this world, but I've learned that belonging isn't about status, it's about heart. And if helping others makes me worthy of being here, then I hope I never stop." The room fell silent, every word echoing with sincerity. And then, a sound, a single clap, followed by another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet, giving her a standing ovation. Tears streamed down her cheeks as Aarav wrapped his arm around her. From that night on, the narrative changed. Magazines wrote stories titled, "The Heart Behind the Empire. Meera Malhotra's Foundation inspires thousands." From waitress to philanthropist, the woman who redefined grace. Donations poured in. Other CEOs joined the cause. Schools were built, hospitals funded, and families helped. And suddenly, Meera wasn't the poor girl who married rich, she was the woman who made the rich remember the poor. Meanwhile, truth caught up to the past. Investigative reports revealed Sophia Grant's manipulation, her fake sources, her planted stories, and her secret deal with a rival media company. She tried to apologize publicly, but the world had moved on. One journalist summed it up perfectly. Sophia's scandal may have tried to break a woman, but instead, it built a legacy. At the Malhotra mansion, peace finally returned. Mr. Malhotra Sr. sat in his favorite armchair, reading an article about the foundation. His eyes glistened with pride as he looked up at Meera, who was arranging flowers nearby. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think the night you saved me was just about fate, but now I see it was the beginning of something much bigger." Meera smiled. "You're too kind, Grandpa." He shook his head. "No, my dear, you didn't just save my life, you saved our family." Her heart swelled at his words. He continued, his voice warm and proud. "You reminded Aarav of compassion, you reminded me of gratitude, and you reminded everyone else that real wealth is measured by the heart." She knelt beside his chair, taking his hand. "I only did what anyone would have done." He chuckled softly. "That's where you're wrong. Most people would have walked away. You ran toward kindness, and that's what makes you extraordinary." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Meera and Aarav stood together on the balcony. The city lights glittered below like 1,000 tiny stars. Meera leaned into him and whispered, I never thought I'd be accepted like this. He smiled, kissing her forehead. You weren't accepted because of me, Meera. You were accepted because of you. She laughed quietly. You always know what to say. That's because I'm always looking at you, he said softly. They stood in silence for a while, letting the cool breeze wash over them. Then Aarav said, almost to himself, I used to think success was about what I built, but now I know it's about who stands beside me while I build it. Meera's eyes shimmered. And who keeps you grounded when you forget? He grinned. Exactly. The next morning, the first newsletter from the Meera Foundation went out to thousands of donors and supporters. At the very top, above all the official messages, was a quote Meera had chosen herself. Kindness doesn't need an audience, but when it finds one, it changes the world. As months passed, the foundation grew beyond anyone's expectations. Aarav attended board meetings, while Meera visited hospitals and schools personally, meeting the very people she had once been part of. Children ran up to her calling her Aunt Meera. Women hugged her with tears of gratitude, and families blessed her for giving them hope. Each smile reminded her that every pain, every judgment, every storm had been worth it, and somewhere, deep down, Meera knew this was her true place, not in the spotlight, not in the mansion, but in the simple, powerful act of giving. The girl who once saved a stranger's life had now saved countless others, not with wealth, but with heart. And standing beside her, as always, was the man who had loved her enough to believe the world could change. Together, they had turned scandal into strength, and love into legacy. Months passed. And the Malhotra mansion, once silent and cold, now echoed with laughter and lullabies. Meera sat by the window, cradling their newborn daughter, her tiny fingers curling around Meera's. Aarav stood nearby, watching them with the softest smile she had ever seen. The same man who once ruled boardrooms with an iron heart now melted at the sight of his family. As he lifted the baby into his arms, he whispered, Your mother saved my world. That's why I promised to spoil her forever. Meera laughed, tears of joy glimmering in her eyes. Looks like you're keeping that promise. The camera or narrative slowly pans out, the warm glow of morning light filling the room, the sound of gentle giggles blending with the soft hum of love. Aarav, Meera, and their little girl, the family built not by power, but by kindness. Ending line. Love doesn't care about status, it only recognizes the heart that's pure. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming love stories. Share it with someone who still believes in real, selfless love. Because sometimes, one act of kindness can change everything.